Sickle cell is a debilitating, awful illness, but it's invisible. I remember thinking, what on earth are you talking about? Someone has just died. Like, how am I one of the most sickest patients on this ward? I was so confused. They didn't really believe that I was going to make it in surgery. The pain was the most atrocious thing I'd ever felt, ever. If someone's sick, they'll be fine in a week. I'll be sick for a month. Anyone with sickle cell should also be empowered to know that you can do whatever it is that you want to do. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit different to my normal book content because today I'm going to be talking about sickle cell and my life with sickle cell as someone who has the disorder, because it is Sickle Cell Day, World Sickle Cell Day, and I just really wanted to talk about sickle cell and bring awareness to the disease because it is something that has impacted my life in such a huge way, and so many people have absolutely no idea what it is or how much it can impact someone. And I've always said to myself that one day at some point in my life I wanted to talk about it and tell others about sickle cell, so I'm going to use this opportunity and this platform to do that. What I will say is that this topic is not an easy one to talk about because it is really personal. It is my real life and it has been extremely hard for me to have this illness, which means that some of the stories that I'm going to tell you guys and some of my experiences is linked to a lot of trauma and linked to a lot of painful memories. So I'm going to do my best to keep it together in this video, but just a few disclaimers. There may be tears. I'm an emotional person anyway, but talking about certain topics can obviously bring those emotions back, so there could be tears in this video. There will also be some talk of death and blood, so that's kind of a trigger warning for anyone who feels uncomfortable hearing about those kind of topics, blood transfusions, death. I would just say that I've got some timestamps, so feel free to skip those parts of the videos, or feel free to just not watch at all and take care of your mental health if that is something that will be hard for you to listen to. And also, I am not a medical professional, so whilst I am someone who suffers with sickle cell and has the illness myself, it doesn't mean that I know everything about sickle cell. There may be things in this video that someone else with sickle cell doesn't relate to, and that's completely fine. And I also just won't know every single thing there is to know about this illness. So if there are any questions, I am going to be linking lots of resources in the description. I'm going to be linking some charities as well for sickle cell, and just any more information that you might want to know about sickle cell will be in the description box. I might also be looking down because I've got some notes that I wrote for myself so I can make this video as concise and coherent as possible. I was also inspired to make this video a few years ago because I watched a video, let me just get her name, Maggie Mayton, I think it is. I'll link her channel below as well, and she made a video with lots of people who had sickle cell, just talking about the stigma and how it's impacted their lives and what they've gone through with sickle cell, and they were really encouraging people to come forward who have sickle cell to talk about it. So at that point when I watched that video, it was a really hard time. It was during COVID, I think, and I was shielded in, so I did not feel like I would have added much value to discourse at that point. Probably not true, just how I was thinking, but I do think I can now. So without further ado, what is sickle cell? I've said it about 10 times already in this video. What actually is it? So sickle cell is a blood disorder. It is genetic, so you have to inherit the gene from both parents. I'll try and include some images as well for those visual learners, but essentially your blood type needs to be AS in one parent and AS in the other, and you would need to get the S from both parents to have sickle cell. It does vary. There are different traits and different types of sickle cell. So there are people with SC or CC. I personally have double S sickle cell. So there are varieties, but I'll just be talking about sickle cell SS. And so I got the S from my mum and the S from my dad, which meant that I have sickle cell, but there was a 1 in 4 chance of that happening to me. I could have got both their A's, I could have got 1A, 1S, but it just turned out that I got both S's and my brother got AS, so that means that he's got the trait and not the full illness. So that's kind of how people are born with sickle cell. It's genetic, but what sickle cell actually is essentially your red blood cells are circular and they carry oxygen around your body, and that is the function of your blood, right? But for people with sickle cell, not all of our red blood cells are round and circle. We have sickle cell, which means that our blood cells are a banana shape. So because of that, they can't carry as much oxygen around the body, and also they can be a little stickier, which means that once they are going around the body, they can stick together, they can cause blockages in blood vessels, and this causes extreme pain, and that would be called a sickle cell crisis. So a sickle cell crisis is when these sickled blood shapes that are shaped like bananas get stuck and block a vessel. And everyone experiences these crises differently in different parts of their body. Most commonly it's in joints. For me personally, if I have a crisis, it can impact me in my arms, in my legs and in my back. Those are the 3 main areas that I'm normally impacted when I do have a sickle cell crisis. And as for what the pain feels like, I'm asked that question a lot, and it's really hard to explain to people who don't have sickle cell. Of course, as well, it's going to feel different for everyone, I'm assuming. But essentially, for me, how I feel like I've best described it to my partner who once asked me this is, imagine you've got a bruise, like a really painful bruise on an area of your body, and someone is repeatedly punching that bruise. So that bruise that's already sore and achy is just getting punched repeatedly, and there's not a let up. That's kind of how I can explain it, because it's like a very extreme ache and pain that is just really hard to get rid of. And in fact, for most crises, normally if you are going to have a crisis, they get worse before they eventually get better, at least for me. So that's kind of how I would describe it. I've also described it before as like a sharp stabbing pain, but I think the ache metaphor is the bruise metaphor is probably the closest to how I can imagine it might feel like for someone who's not experienced it before. So yeah, that's kind of an overview, and I think it's also important to know what causes these crises, how can you avoid them, why would you go into crisis, and there are a few triggers for me personally. I don't know if this is a trigger for everybody. I think maybe some people will be triggered by different things, but for me, I get triggered with crisis or being vulnerable to a crisis if I'm extremely cold, if I'm extremely hot, if I have overexerted myself, so been, running around. If I went to the gym and I took it too far, that could cause a crisis. And also just extreme emotional reactions. So if I were to be really angry, if I were to be really upset or excited, that can also cause a crisis. So as you can imagine, it's really hard to avoid some of these scenarios because they are part of life. Sometimes it is cold. We live in England, that happens a lot. So it's just making sure I wrap up really well. Also dehydration. If I'm not drinking enough water, that's another thing that can cause me to have a crisis. So yeah, that's kind of some background knowledge for anyone who has no idea about what sickle cell is, why people have sickle cell, and what can cause a crisis and what a crisis is. So now I'm going to try and just take you guys through my personal journey with sickle cell, how it's impacted my life, and yeah, why I want to bring awareness or more awareness to the topic. I know it's currently in the news right now about a cure that's been found for sickle cell, which is great. I'm glad that there's discourse around the illness and research around the illness. However, I'm just going to put out there that I'm 30. I have had this illness since I was a child, a baby, and throughout my life I've heard lots of things about cures and medications and things that are meant to help sickle cell. Not to say that this won't, and it's really exciting news, but it just means that even if there is new research in medicine and cures out there, it doesn't necessarily mean that every single person with sickle cell is eligible or is going to work for them. And it is new research, it's new medical technology, so it will take a while to roll out if it is the cure. And I think it's still important to know how sickle cell has already impacted me in my 30 years of life so far. So to start from the very beginning, how I found out, my mum found out that I had sickle cell. I think I was a baby, I'm not quite sure how old, but I wasn't 1 year, and I was suffering from a cold, a really, really bad cold, and it was just taking me a long time to get over this cold. I wasn't able to get over it basically on my own, and I was having temperatures and stuff. My mum was just worried. She just didn't know why it was taking so long for me to recover, so she took me to the doctors and they ran some tests on me, and that's how they found out that I had sickle cell. So that's how they found out she had the trait, because she had no clue, neither did my dad. They both didn't know they had the trait. So it was a big shock, and my mum did so much research and learning into sickle cell and finding out how to best support me and make sure that I could live a healthy life, because at that time getting a diagnosis of sickle cell anemia was scary for her, and also just in general what life looks like with a young child with sickle cell when you're trying to balance work and everything else going on. My mum actually is a single mum, and since I was about 3 years old it has just been me, her and my brother, so having the child with sickle cell definitely has impacted her as well as me. So when she found out I had sickle cell, she, like I said, did lots of research. I got admitted to a consultant and they took over my care and found out how to, you know, manage my symptoms when I had them and what to do if I was in crisis and that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, when my brother was born about 3 or 4 months later, I became really, really unwell, and my mum rushed me to hospital because she said that I was finding it really hard to breathe. So by now she knew I had sickle cell, so of course she was really worried. And because I was finding it so hard to breathe, like, the doctors took it very seriously, and they found that my spleen was collecting all of my red blood cells. So if you don't know what a spleen is, because it's kind of a random organ in your stomach, it's basically, the job of a spleen is to ensure that your immune system is working. It fights germs in the blood and it cleans like blood that is bad, it like takes it away, and blood that is good it puts back in the body, kind of thing. But my spleen was just, I don't know, I guess it decided that all my blood was bad and it just collected it all, which is why I couldn't really breathe. I didn't have enough blood going round my body to deliver oxygen. So when they found this out, they knew that they had to operate and do a splenectomy and take out my spleen. But because I was so poorly, I didn't have enough blood in me to survive like a huge surgery. They couldn't do it straight away, so I had to wait for 6 months whilst they did a blood transfusion or a blood exchange transfusion, where they would take out the bad blood and then put in good blood. They had to do that over time before I was healthy enough to have this operation. And yeah, then I went through the operation and they were basically bracing my mum for the worst. They didn't really believe that I was going to make it in surgery, so they just said to her, you know, prepare for the worst. But luckily I survived and I'm still here, thank goodness for that, thank God for that. And yeah, I survived that surgery, but that kind of was the start of my never-ending sort of cycle throughout hospitals and yeah, the hospital, essentially, my mum would always say, was my second home. If I wasn't at home, I was in hospital. And I was in hospital a lot growing up. That was kind of the introduction to, wow, my child really isn't well, for my mum. So it was really hard for her. And she would constantly worry. So when I started school and stuff, it was like a battle to get me to not do too much, you know, don't go outside when it's cold, don't join in PE when you're tired. And that's hard as a kid, because all you want to do is be with your friends and do what your friends are doing, and just, you don't really know you're sick. And that's one of the really important things that I want to put across in this video, is that sickle cell is a debilitating, awful illness, but it's invisible. So to the naked eye, anyone who just meets me now will just think I'm a typical healthy person. And for the most part, when I'm not in crisis, I feel like I'm a typical healthy person. I can myself forget that I have this illness, but it's so important to not forget, because I have to do a lot of things to ensure that I stay healthy. So yeah, because it is invisible, some people can sometimes think you're lying, they can think you're not really ill, they can take for granted when you are fine 1 minute and then not the next. They're like, well, you were just fine a second ago, so what's going on? That is something I've had to deal with a lot in life. So yeah, just to put that note, we'll get to those kind of points later, but to put that out there, it is invisible. Unless you can see it in my body and see my blood cells being sickle shaped, you probably wouldn't be able to just tell. Some people can tell from my eyes. I do have a little bit of jaundice in my eyes. I think that's a thing to do with the spleen and my iron levels and stuff. But anyway, back to the story before I go on a tangent. So essentially, throughout my school life, I spent a lot of time in hospital. I would say I was in hospital on average about 3 times a year, and I would be in hospital for maybe like 2 to 3 weeks each time, typically with a crisis. And I forgot to mention that infections, colds, that kind of thing, I think because I also haven't got a spleen, but also coupled with sickle cell, means that it can bring on a crisis. Because if my body is putting all of its effort to fight a cold or an infection, then it hasn't got the reserves to also pump my blood around my body, and that can cause crisis, and my body's under stress. There's a lot of complications that can happen with sickle cell, like strokes, poor lung capacity, really bad eyes and eyesight, because your blood vessels can burst behind your eyes when you're in crisis. So yeah, it did mean that being at school, of course, you're prone to picking up a cold. If someone's sick, they'll be fine in a week. I'll be sick for a month. Like, that's kind of how it worked for me. So my mum did try really hard to talk to my teachers and make sure that I wasn't going outside when it was too cold. I wasn't always doing PE. I was drinking water. I'd be able to go to get lunch early because they thought I needed to, you know, keep my energy up and stuff. So that had its pros and cons. Obviously, it was sometimes nice to have special attention and get to pick a friend to go to lunch with, but for the most part, I really hated the fact that I was different from my friends, and that I had sickle cell, because it just meant that I had to think about things that no one else was thinking about. I couldn't just go outside without a coat, never in a million years. And in fact, most of the time when it was winter, I wasn't allowed outside to play because it was just too risky. So I would have to go to the library, and I could pick a friend and I would just stay in the library. And that kind of is where my love of reading began, because I would just have to read, and I also like to write. I remember when I was in year 3, I was particularly upset. I think that's the age where you're just a bit more aware. I think you're about 8 years old, and it's more obvious that you're different to your friends. And there was one event that was going on, I think it was snowing maybe, and everyone was playing outside in the snow. And my teacher at the time, his name was Chris, he reminded me that I wasn't allowed to go because it was too cold. My mum had told him, you know, I have to stay inside. And I just had a meltdown. I was so upset, I was crying. And he said to me, I know you really like writing, poetry and stories. So why don't you use all this emotion you're feeling right now and write a poem about how you feel? And that was what I did over my lunch break. I remember I sat down in the classroom and I just wrote about sickle cell and how it felt to like 8-year-old me. And like whenever I read that poem, I feel so sad for 8-year-old Deb, because the way I described sickle cell at that point, it was just sad. It's like, it's really hard. Like I was a teacher up until last year, and I just remember feeling so lonely and different. And so when he came back, he read the poem and he cried, which was very uncomfortable for me as a kid. I was like, oh my gosh, my teacher's crying in front of me. And also he was a man, and back then, you know, seeing a guy cry was a big deal, let alone your teacher. Sorry, I had to just compose myself for a second. So yeah, so he actually submitted that poem to the CBBC website or something, and it got published on BBC. So somewhere on the internet, my poem is out there about sickle cell and how sad I was about having it. But that kind of wraps up my primary school years, really. I was either having a great time at school or I was at hospital. The doctors and nurses knew me so well. I had a favourite doctor, favourite nurse. They'd like see I was in and it would just be like, oh, you're back again. They knew me so well. My favourite foods, my favourite drinks, my favourite film, Matilda. Whenever I would go to hospital, my favourite nurse, he would literally reel in the like DVD or video player with Matilda, like ready to go. I'm like, yep, you're here, let's put it on. And that's become such a comfort film for me. I love Matilda. And I think it's because it was just like a comfort watch when I was in hospital. So yeah, so that was kind of how it was when I was in primary school. When I went to secondary school, I remember getting to more serious years where I had GCSEs and A-levels, and I remember being really stressed about that, because that's kind of when you realise the gap of how much school that you missed, being off, ill, how it's impacted you. Because when you're in primary school, you don't feel the gap as much, but you do feel it in secondary school. You feel like, oh wow, I'm behind, I didn't learn this, I have no idea about this. And there are hospital schools that you can go to, and I did go to hospital schools, but back then it wasn't as well organised as it is now, where your schools are in contact with the hospital teachers and you can send over work. It was kind of like they'd give you, I don't know, like a little workbook they've just got around that you could do whilst you were in hospital. So I didn't really perform to my best abilities, in my opinion, in my GCSEs. I did okay. I got into sixth form and stuff, it was fine, but I had like ambitions of being a doctor, because I think having sickle cell, I was like, I'm always in hospitals and these doctors and nurses are amazing people who are helping people like me who are so ill. So I really wanted to be a doctor, and I just didn't have good enough grades to do like biology and chemistry at A-levels. So my mum actually convinced them by getting my auntie, who is a doctor, to come into school and like fight my case that, you know, whilst I didn't have the required grade, I think it was a B you were meant to get to do biology, and I got a C. I'm like hard working, it's just that I've got sickle cell, so I've missed a lot of school, but like they should give me a chance and stuff, and that was really lovely, my mum and my auntie. I do think my school should have been more accommodating anyway, about my sickle cell. For the most part, I didn't really have that many issues in secondary school. So yeah, that's kind of like my early years, my school life. I actually didn't end up doing medicine at uni. I went to uni to do criminology and sociology, which is so different to what I'm actually doing now as a software engineer. But anyway, that's what I went to uni for. And uni was a really interesting time of life actually, because I was living away from home for the first time and I had sickle cell, so it was like, whoa, a huge deal. I luckily had a flatmate who also had a medical condition that meant that he had to take life just slower and easier than most. So he really understood how it felt to need to, you know, maybe not always go out or maybe sometimes take a break. And that was really good for me to have a friend like that, and we were really close for the 3 years I was at uni. So I'm really grateful. I did have a crisis or a few crises at university. One of my actually, before I even get to that, during my A-levels I was in hospital when I had my A2 exams, so my final, I think I did 2 of them, and then I was in hospital, and yeah, the exams that I needed to do well in to get into university I missed. They had to average out my score somehow. That was very typical. Like, I would be under so much stress and that stress would cause a crisis, and then I would miss the exam, miss the whatever. So yeah, I think school was really hard in that way. Uni was a little bit better because you could take it more at your own pace. You still had exams and stuff, but there was coursework and things that just kind of spread it out a bit more throughout the year rather than one period of time that you were working towards. But in my first year, I did get really ill and they had to call the hospital to the ambulance to take me to hospital. And my best friend at the time, she came with me, which was amazing because she also had an exam that morning and she still came with me. I think because it was first year, it was a little bit less scary knowing that it doesn't count, but it was still really horrible to go through knowing you were missing an exam. And I think that's when the reality of having sickle cell and not being in London anymore really dawned on me, because whilst I wasn't far from London at all, I was in Surrey, in Egham. I went to Royal Holloway. The hospitals were different. They weren't like hospitals in London. They didn't really treat patients with sickle cell that often because I guess their demographic is different. Typically, sickle cell affects people from African and Caribbean descent, sometimes Asian as well. It can affect white heritage as well. My mum did actually help a woman who was white that had a sickle cell baby and had no clue she had the trait. But usually it's common in the African and Caribbean community, and because there isn't a huge community, at least at the time when I was at uni there, having sickle cell was not, there wasn't like a normal plan like, oh, I know what to do, I'll give her oxygen, I'll give her pain medicine. It was a bit longer to come to a idea of how to treat me, and that was very eye-opening. I think ever since then it's really made me think about, if I do move out of London, how important it is that I find a hospital that understands sickle cell. I think we all know the story of Evan. I think his name's Evan Smith. But the 21-year-old boy who had sickle cell, and he was literally in his hospital bed calling 999 for oxygen that the hospital had denied him, and he sadly died. And that story makes me so angry, because there is such a huge stigma around sickle cell and the pain that we go through. Do they really need pain meds? Are they really that ill? I think it's worse in America, but I think the fact that someone died in the hospital bed highlights that the UK also has problems, especially right now with all that's going on with hospitals and the NHS. But yeah, that was very eye-opening for me as well, being in hospital and just feeling so isolated away from my mum and by my family, and away from doctors that have a plan for me when I come into hospital. But I'm quite lucky in the sense that my sickle cell so far, touch wood, praise God, seems to have gotten better since I was a child. Sometimes people can be relatively healthy as a child, and then as an adult the sickle cell can affect them more. Sometimes it can be quite constant, and sometimes, I guess in my case, as a child I was in hospital a lot, like 3 times a year on average, sometimes more, rarely less. As an adult, I'm really happy that it's definitely nowhere near 3 times a year. I think even once a year now is a bad year for me if I'm in hospital, but it can happen. But I'm talking about admissions. I do sometimes have to go just for some pain relief, or if I have a chest infection, which is very common for me with sickle cell. I'm just prone to catching infections. But yeah, luckily it seems that I've been a bit better as I've gotten older, so that's positive. So after university, it was time to get a job, and I had decided that I wanted to be a teacher, and I just got some experience as a TA first, and that was eye-opening. I think it was very different going from studying to teaching, and the physical demands as well. Working in a school, like you're on your feet a lot, you're on playground duty, so you're outside a lot. I had to really find my voice at times and say, this isn't okay, like for my health I can't be on duty for an hour in the cold, it just doesn't make sense for me. But it took me a while to get there, and that therefore did impact my health a lot. And I was in hospital the first 3 years of starting the workforce a lot more than I'd been prior. I was getting infections and colds from the kids at school all the time, and that really impacted my health. And that was a really hard time in life actually, because I just started to wonder, will I be able to work? I remember at the time the head teacher of the school said to me, you know, I think you should really evaluate whether teaching is for you, whether you should be working in schools. And I'm pretty sure that he meant to be, I don't know, I don't think he was trying to put me down. I don't know for sure. I think he was trying to be realistic, but it was really hurtful. It really hurt me when he said essentially, like, I'm not sure, you should probably rethink your career path because of your absences. I'm not even sure we'll be able to keep you, not for the lack of how good you are at the role, just when you're off it's really hard for the school, which it is, I can understand that, but it was really hard for me as well. There's something called teacher guilt. If you're a teacher or worked in a school or worked in a profession where people rely on you, then I'm sure you're familiar. But no one was more upset that I wasn't in than me. Like, I would cry because I felt so guilty about being off, but I had to put myself first in those situations. So yeah, at that point of life, things did become a little bit harder, and I did get a lot more sick. And there's an occasion that comes to mind the most because it was probably one of the most traumatic experiences in terms of going to hospital and staying for as long as I did. That happened around that time as well. So in 2017, I think it was, I went out with my friends for New Year's Eve, and we went out and all was fine. It was really, really cold, so I wore a huge coat, didn't take it off until we got into the bar we were going to. We just got to the bar, so I'd maybe had one drink, 2 at the most, and it had just started to get to that time when you count down for New Year's. And I just didn't feel great. Like, I could feel twinges in my back, and I was like, oh dear, like, let me just sit down for a bit, drink some water. Like, I'm not going to drink any more alcohol. I hadn't had a lot anyway, but I just wanted to just rehydrate myself and rest and see how I felt. But it just got worse, and it got worse and worse and worse. And by this point, my friends were quite drunk. And they were having a really good time. So I just told myself, I'm just going to try my best to go home, lie down, take stronger medicine that I've got at home, and then hopefully I'll wake up and this will be fine. So I went home. I found it really, really hard to walk. The pain in my back was just getting worse, and it felt like it was on fire. I felt like I couldn't move really easily, and I was honestly just on a mission to get to my house from central London. So because it was New Year's Eve, there were lots of people around, which I felt a bit safer because I was really not well. And I got to the train station and I just couldn't do it. My body just couldn't move anymore, so I had to just take a break and sit down. And people at the train station, which understandably it was New Year's Eve, so they thought I was just a drunk girl that had too much to drink, and I had a few people offer to help me get home. Or there was the train, I think he worked for the train station, who just said to me, I can't sit there. And I was saying to him, like, I'm just not well, and he just said, you have to move. So I did. I found a way to get on the train somehow. Then I found a way to get an Uber, and I remember waiting for that Uber for so long, and it was so cold, and I just felt awful, horrendous. But luckily I got home. It was about maybe 3 a.m. when I got home, and I went straight into bed. I put on so many layers because I was freezing cold. I took paracetamol, ibuprofen, codeine. I took literally everything I could find in my medicine drawer. I took it all, and I waited for 20 minutes, half an hour, an hour, and there was no let up in the pain. The pain was the most atrocious thing I'd ever felt, ever. And I was so scared because I had not felt pain like that in such a long time. And especially as you get older, your pain tolerance, I guess, increases from when you're a child. So I remember just being so scared because that pain was the worst pain that I'd experienced in my adult life in relation to sickle cell. And I was debating with myself, do I wake up my mum? And I just felt awful. I felt so guilty because it was meant to be New Year's Day. She loved New Year's Day. She cooks a big meal, and she hadn't wanted me to go out anyway. She didn't normally like me going out because it was cold in those months before New Year's Eve and stuff. So she would have preferred that I stayed home and just had a chill one. But I was adamant that, I was like, I think I was 21 or so. It's like, I'm gonna go out with my friends and yeah, I'll be fine. I've been out before, Mum, I'm fine. So she was like, yeah, fine, go. And so now I was laying in bed thinking, oh my God, like, I'm gonna ruin New Year's. I can't believe I'm gonna have to go to hospital. Like, I just was in bed just crying, thinking about this. And then around 6 a.m. I heard her get up to go to the toilet, and I was like, right, this pain has not gotten better. I had taken more painkillers like an hour later, which is not what you're meant to do at all. Do not do that. If you ever are in pain, you're meant to wait for 3 hours before you take another dose. But I was in so much pain, I was just desperate. I was desperate to not have to go to hospital, and I was desperate for the pain to stop. But it didn't work. Even after taking double the dose and only an hour between them, the pain just didn't let go. It didn't go away. So I told my mum, like, Mum, I'm really sorry, but I'm in a lot of pain. And we called the ambulance. I went straight to hospital, and it was an atrocious experience. That A&E doctor that I spoke to, and this A&E doctor is not a good representation for doctors in the NHS. There are some amazing doctors, and I'm so grateful to doctors, but doctors like this unfortunately stick in your brain. And this A&E doctor basically said that the only reason I was in so much pain was because I was drinking, and the alcohol in my body made me dehydrated, which has caused the sickle cell. So it's my fault. So basically he was saying it was my fault. I just knew that it was absolute rubbish. I hadn't had enough to drink that it would impact me like that. I drank all throughout uni responsibly. I had to learn my limits, obviously, and I'd never experienced a reaction to that. Sometimes I might get a few odd pains and know, okay, cool, stop now, drink water, that's enough. So I knew from what I had drank, which was not a lot at all, I think I had one drink, but maybe two, that I was not drunk, I was not tipsy. There was nothing that I would have done that would have caused my body to react the way it was reacting. And I could tell it was different. And so I was telling my mum, I promise you, it wasn't because of that. There's something really wrong. And she believed me. She just said, don't worry, like, we're gonna wait for all your tests to come back. And I went for like an x-ray and things. And it turned out that I had pneumonia. Like a very severe pneumonia, and I guess my pneumonia was like bubbling underneath, like in my body, and it triggered my sickle cell. and the pain that I was experiencing was due to having pneumonia. And that made sense to me. I was like, okay, cool, like let's treat this pneumonia and then hopefully my sickle cell pain will just go away. So I had to stay in hospital for a long time. I was in hospital for altogether, this is a very long story, but I was in hospital for 4 weeks because of pneumonia. And this was when I was still working as a TA in a school. So all that guilt I was talking to you about recently, it was terrible, because we just gone on holiday and I wasn't coming back in the new year for a while because I was in hospital. So whilst I was in the hospital, I remember feeling the worst I've ever felt, because I was the most ill I've ever been. I had to take a lot of morphine. My mum hates me taking morphine because it just knocks me out. I'm just so drowsy after taking it, but it gets to a point where that's the only medicine that has any sort of impact on relieving the pain. And at that point, I was far beyond any other medicine than morphine. So I had to take a lot of morphine to manage that pain. And I was in I wasn't in intensive care, but I was in the unit just below that, like, not really sure what you call it, priority care or something. And yeah, I was under very, very powerful antibiotics through your IV and stuff. And not only was I like on these antibiotics, but I think because of the pneumonia I had to have a blood transfusion, and I didn't react well to that blood transfusion. There's a name for it, but I'm not quite sure what my reaction was, but they had to stop that. But because I was so poorly, I needed that, so they gave me something else. I'm not sure what it was called, but that seemed to help. But I remember during this hospital stay, when the pneumonia was bad, I remember them being like, we've not found an antibiotic that is working for this pneumonia, and that was really scary to hear. Luckily by this point my sickle cell crisis had subsided a bit, so I was still in pain, but nowhere near what it was when I first got into hospital. But because of how poorly I was in a ward where I was seeing really horrific things. So I unfortunately saw someone pass away right in front of me in hospital, which was scary. It was hard, of course. This person literally was just snoring 1 minute, and then the nurse went to wake them up and they just were not responsive, and their curtain got drawn, and yeah, they were taken away, and they passed away. And I remember when that happened, I felt really scared, because I was like, wow, I know I'm sick, but I didn't know I was sick enough to be in a ward where people are sick enough that they're dying. So that was really, really scary. That was the scariest hospital stay of my life. But things unfortunately only got worse from there, because the antibiotics weren't working. The doctors were just really trying their best to find a way to help me. And there was one evening where I was particularly not responding well to anything. The blood transfusion had gone terribly, so I was really poorly from that. I was still very out of it from my crisis, and then this pneumonia was just refusing to leave my body and heal. So yeah, I remember having this near-death experience where I don't really know what happened, but I remember there were lots and lots of doctors around me and lots and lots of nurses around me, and they were trying to do something to me, and I think they were trying to change my medicine or something, or change my cannula. I don't know, they were trying to do something to me, but they were really concerned about me. So they drew my curtain, and I just felt very sleepy and tired. So I remember closing my eyes and just thinking, oh, whatever, whilst they get on with what they're doing, I'm just going to try and go to sleep. And I closed my eyes, I went to sleep, and I just saw my mum in my head, and it was so vivid, it was really vivid, and it was like a dark room, and there was just like a tunnel, and I was just walking down the tunnel, and I saw my mum. I could hear her voice, and I saw her, and she was really angry at me. She was saying, "Why are you closing your eyes? Wake up, wake up, what are you doing? Wake up, wake up." And I was like, "Mum, chill, what's the matter? Why are you shouting at me?" And she's like, wake up now. And so I opened my eyes, and the amount of doctors and nurses had like doubled. The amount of doctors and nurses had like doubled, and the nurse, there was this really lovely Filipino nurse, and she was saying to me, Deborah, I need you to open your eyes, I need you to stay with me, I need you to stay awake, don't close your eyes, stay with me. And she was just talking to me, like trying to keep me alert, I guess. And I was so confused. I was so confused. And I remember a few days before that, actually, I had said to my doctor, when will I get to go home? You know, my sickle cell pain's kind of gone. I know I still have pneumonia, but can I take medication for that at home? And I remember he had said to me, Deborah, you're really unwell. You're one of the sickest patients we have on this ward. I remember thinking, what on earth are you talking about? Someone has just died. Like, how am I one of the most sickest patients on this ward? I was so confused. But I think what had happened was my infection numbers were sky high, and they were unable to bring it down for the longest time. And so because of that, I was really unwell, but it just didn't really occur to me how unwell I was. So yeah, unfortunately I did end up having to experience a second death in that hospital. I woke up in the middle of the night one night and had to go to the toilet, so I pushed my drip and my cannula stuff to the toilet, and I just realised that my curtains were drawn, and I was like, that's strange, I don't remember drawing my curtains. But okay, and I just left, and when I got out of my area and was walking down the hallway to the toilet, or the wall to the toilets, I realised that every single person's curtains were drawn, and I was like, why have they drawn everyone's curtains? Anyway, I was half asleep, so I went to the toilet, I was coming back to my bed, and then I just saw them wheeling out another person, and they had a sheet around them. I just, at that point, I just didn't even know if I didn't know if I was going to end up being rolled out on. I just didn't know if it didn't feel like I was ever going to get out of the hospital. Yeah, I felt really low. That was probably the hardest, the lowest I've ever felt with my mental health, of just feeling like helplessness, hopelessness, and extreme loneliness. You know, it was meant to be my birthday soon. All of my friends had been celebrating New Year's. My brother had like exams he was meant to be revising for. My mum was working. She obviously came to visit me every single day, but she had to work because she's the only breadwinner of our family at that point. So it's just, yeah, it was really hard. And I didn't really get any visitors. My friends are so supportive and amazing, but just when, I don't know, when you're that sick, you don't really want visitors anyway. You don't want people to see you that way. I do have one friend, Jess, who I just want to shout out, because she's got a brother who has sickle cell, and many occasions where she came to visit me just to chat. Like, she'd come before a date or after a date just for an hour, and that made such a difference to my mental health. Just to have a friend for an hour to talk to and not feel like I'm just alone in this hospital bed, just with no hope of ever getting out. I had other friends visit me as well, but generally Jess came to visit me a lot. So I just want to say, like, Jess, if you're watching this, like, those visits meant more to me than you could ever imagine. Like, in a really dark time in my life, having someone there was really helpful. And of course I have my family, my friends, and my mum and brother and stuff. Like, I don't want to seem like I had no one, but when you're in hospital for so long, it's just a really lonely place to be, especially when you're in pain as well. Sorry, I had to just bring it back together. I knew that was going to be the part where I got the most emotional in, because that hospital visit was and still is the worst hospital visit of my life, because once I was discharged, I had begged them to discharge me because it was my birthday coming up, like, in a few days, and I really did not want to be in hospital for my birthday. I literally spent like 2 days out of hospital, and then I had to go back to hospital because I got a crisis again, and they called that a failed discharge. I basically got discharged too early, so because of that they kept me in hospital even longer the second time to make sure that there was no more failed discharge. So altogether it was about 4.5 weeks that I was in hospital. And I remember that at that time Ed Sheeran brought out 2 songs on the same day. It was Castle on the Hill and The Shape of You. And I remember I was so excited to listen to that. It just felt like a little piece of, like, my personality, that I still had, like, my love of music, and at that point I was obsessed with Ed Sheeran. So yeah, I remember listening to those songs, and especially Castle on the Hill. I don't know why, I could just imagine, like, escaping the hospital to that song. It's like the soundtrack to my escape. So whenever I hear that song, I can't not think of that time in my life of just feeling like I wanted to escape. But yeah, that was tough. That hospital visit, that was really hard for my family and me. And my mum, honestly, like, is a superwoman. Everything she's done to help keep me healthy, and when I am in hospital, like, she drops everything. She cooks me all my favourite food. She comes to visit me. She just sits there. She falls asleep, like, sitting next to me, because she's exhausted from worrying about me, having to work, cooking for me, bringing it to the hospital. She doesn't drive, so yeah, it's not just me it impacts, it's also her. So I think I need to kind of come to a conclusion to this video before I start rambling. I feel like it's way too long already. There's so many things I've not spoken about. There's so much to say about sickle cell. Just jumping in here really quickly, because I was just watching the clips back and I realised that I didn't even wrap up what happened with my career. Like, I didn't just have that hospital visit and experience and that was it. I actually did go on to do my PGCE and become a teacher, and I worked in a school for 5 years as a teacher, and I did really well. I was also the music lead, and I achieved what that head teacher told me might not be possible for me. So I want anyone who's watching this video that has sickle cell to know that you can achieve whatever it is you want to do as well. Don't let people tell you you can't do what you want to do because of your sickle cell, because what they should be doing is saying, okay, you have sickle cell, or you have this condition, what can we put in place to support you, to help you be able to do your job? And for me, luckily, in my school that I was in before I left, that was things like I wouldn't go on playground duty for an hour. You know, I wouldn't be out in the cold for a whole hour. I had my own heater in the classroom for when it was especially cold. I had 2 fans for when it was especially hot to regulate my temperature. So there are things that the workplace can do, that schools can do to support you. And I was really lucky that I had colleagues and a school that did accommodate my health. don't get me wrong, there were definitely hard periods. There were times where I was ill and I felt stressed and I felt pressured and I felt guilt to come in even though I wasn't well enough, and I pushed myself too hard sometimes because that's the nature of the job. And that is part of the reason that I have now left teaching. And it wasn't the only reason. The biggest reason was I wanted to change careers and try software engineering and try tech, and I'm really, really grateful that I got that opportunity. But my health also was at the back of my mind. I have been the healthiest I've been so far as an adult, but I thought I could be healthier, and I felt that getting on into my adulthood and into my 30s and thinking about eventually having children somewhere down the line, I needed to think about what would be the best course of action for my health, and I felt like leaving teaching was the best choice for me. But that was my choice. It wasn't someone telling me that teaching isn't the career for me. That was me saying, okay, I've done teaching now for 8 years and I'm ready to move on with my career into a different path. And I think anyone with sickle cell should also be empowered to know that you can do whatever it is that you want to do, that you feel called to do. There may need to be some adaptations made for you to make it more accessible for you for whatever that is you want to do. There may be things that just need to be changed slightly, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. And I don't know, if you're a parent or someone with sickle cell, I would say just try and encourage them to go after whatever it is they want to do, because I just think telling someone they can't do something because of a condition they have that they've got no control over is unacceptable. And yes, they need to understand their limits, understand their bodies, but only they can decide whether or not they are up to something. So yeah, I really thought that was an important message to put across. I also wanted to jump in and say that it wasn't just my mum that is affected by me having sickle cell. My brother also lives with us, and if I'm in hospital, my mum's in hospital, he's on his own, he probably experienced loneliness as well. Or sometimes he'd have to come into hospital when he was too young to be left alone. He had exams and stuff that he'd be worried about me, so he can't concentrate. So when someone has sickle cell, it isn't just them that's affected. Their siblings, their family members, their friends, their colleagues. It is something that can affect a whole bunch of people. That's why it's so important to be aware and be mindful. It's just good to be aware of not just sickle cell, but anything that's invisible, any disability, especially invisible ones. You never know what someone's going through. You never know what kind of life they have. Even if you can't see that they're struggling, it doesn't mean they're not struggling. So just be kind and be supportive, be empathetic. That's a really important message that I want to get through in this video. So yeah, I'm gonna let past Deb carry on with what she was saying and wrap up this video. So I wanted to bring awareness to sickle cell. It impacts many areas in life. The pain is unbearable when you're in crisis, but it's not just pain. There's also things like infections. I caught a cold at Disneyland and you can still hear it. I've been crying, so it doesn't help, but I'm still not 100% over it. It will just take me a lot longer than the average person to get over. I'm now in, just to say, in those stories, I hadn't met Toby yet. So there's many more stories of now me being in a relationship and how that's impacted us and our relationship. But I'm really lucky to have him because he's so supportive, so caring, so loving, and goes above and beyond to help me stay healthy as well. So forever grateful for Toby and his family as well. Just so supportive, so lovely. But I was really worried, I remember, about being in a relationship, having sickle cell. So that might be another video that I talk about that in at some point, because I do want to make videos every now and again about sickle cell. Not often. This channel is about reading and about books, but I do want to be a sickle cell advocate, and so I do occasionally I will make content about sickle cell, and I do want to bring awareness to it because people can really underestimate how much it impacts us and how much we go through with this illness. And I think it's absolutely disgusting that us sufferers have to pay for our prescription. It's not under an exemption that other people get, like diabetes, for example. We've been petitioning for years and years to get it on the exemption list, and it's not on there. I don't understand why. It's a genetic disorder that no one's asked for, through no cause of our actions, that we are born with, and we suffer with immense pain. And unless we are hospitalised in the UK, I'm not sure about America, we have to pay for our prescriptions, and I'm on lifelong medications to manage my sickle cell. So I think it's just really unfair. There's so much that goes into it politically as to why that's the choice they've made. But I'm going to leave a petition down in the description that if you could please sign it, I'd be so grateful for, because yeah, it's not a disease that I want to have, but I do have it and I have to live with it, and I shouldn't have to pay for medication that keeps me healthy. It should just be under the NHS. So if there's anyone that you know with sickle cell, maybe at work, maybe a friend, I would just really encourage you to be really mindful of their health. You know, if for whatever reason they turn down plans with you, they can't make it, they cancel last minute, try not to take it out on them, try to be understanding. If you're on holiday with them and they are unable to do a long hike with you, you know, don't put any pressure on them, because if they get a crisis, that would be the end of that holiday for them. Do you know what I mean? If you work with someone with sickle cell and they're off sick, send a nice message. It does go a long way, and I'm really lucky that I've got really lovely colleagues in this job, but also my last job that I had, that I've just recently left to pursue another career. I had really supportive, amazing, kind people around me that, whilst I was going through pain and sickle cell crises, I knew would be understanding and would not be judging me being off and being unwell. And that can be really scary and impact your mental health when you're worried about how other people are perceiving you, and you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to get better and go back to work, or get better and go to your friend's birthday party, get better and, you know, show up for that event you were meant to go to. Like, sometimes with sickle cell you can't do that. You have to put your health first, otherwise the consequences are awful. So yeah, I guess I wanted to bring awareness that this is something that's impacting many people in the UK, thousands of people in the UK and America, all over the world, Africa, everywhere. There are people suffering with this illness. So if you are open to donating blood, that is something that is tremendously helpful and beneficial. I know I just said the story about unfortunately responding badly to blood in that period of time when I was in hospital for pneumonia, but I have previously had successful blood transfusions that have really, really helped me, and most likely saved my life on occasions as well. There was another story that I haven't said, and I'll save it for another day, but it's another near-death experience when I was a teenager that happened to me, where a blood transfusion did save my life, because my blood count was ridiculous. The doctor said to me, if I had waited even an hour more to call the ambulance, then I might not be here. So yeah, I had to have a blood transfusion on that occasion, so that very much did save my life. So if you can give blood, I would really urge you to do so, especially if you are Black or of an ethnic minority, because we need that kind of blood to match our own blood. So yeah, that's all I've got to say. I've spoken for so long, I don't even know if I made sense. I feel like I've rambled through a lot of it. I hope I've conveyed what I'm trying to say, and I just want to say thank you so much if you have gotten this far into the video. I also want to say thank you to like my mum, because I was calling her and just be like, Mum, I'm making this video, what should I say? And yeah, she's just so supportive. And my boyfriend as well, Tabes, and my brother as well, because they are just like my main support system, and I'm so internally grateful for them, and of course all my lovely friends as well. And all of you guys for watching. So I hope you're keeping well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna stop that there, and I will catch you in my next video where I will resume normal book content. Thanks guys, bye.